In the spring of 1945, as Europe stood among ruins, a decision was made behind closed doors. It happened in occupied Europe, far from the front lines, inside rooms guarded by silence. Documents were sealed. Orders were signed. Names were removed. What followed would never be announced, yet its impact would quietly reshape history.By early 1945, the war in Europe was approaching its final phase. Allied armies had crossed borders that once seemed unreachable. Cities lay shattered. Rail lines twisted. Governments collapsed or fled. Victory appeared inevitable, yet peace remained uncertain. Beneath the public image of liberation, another struggle was forming. One that would never appear in official communiques. British and American intelligence units were operating deep inside occupied and recently liberated territory. Their mission was no longer only military. It was administrative, political, strategic. The question facing Allied leadership was not how to win the war, but how to control what came after it. Europe was exhausted. Power vacuums were everywhere. Information became as valuable as territory. In temporary headquarters set up in requisition buildings, officers reviewed captured documents. Some were routine. Others were not. Lists of scientists, industrial specialists, intelligence officers, administrators, people whose knowledge could shape the post-war world. These files were not meant for the public. They were marked restricted, then classified, then separated entirely. The initial situation was unclear. The Allies had promised cooperation, transparency, and justice. War crimes investigations were publicly announced. Declarations were made about accountability. Yet the reality on the ground was more complex. Certain individuals, though tied to defeated regimes, possessed expertise that could not be easily dismissed. The moral framework of wartime began to blur under the pressure of future competition. Inside Allied command structures, quiet discussions began. British and American officers debated the same issue from different angles. What mattered more? Immediate justice or long-term security? Stability or exposure? Public trials or silent extraction? No single officer held full authority. Decisions passed through committees. Each layer reduced visibility. The early groundwork was subtle. Travel permits were altered. Detention orders delayed. Files reassigned to new departments. Some individuals were quietly transferred out of standard processing routes. Their names vanished from public records. Not erased, but hidden. Their existence became compartmentalized knowledge. This was the beginning of a classified choice. Not dramatic. Not sudden. It did not arrive with signatures alone. It formed gradually, shaped by fear of future conflict and distrust between allies. Europe was not only recovering from one war. It was preparing, unknowingly, for another kind of division. The public never saw this process. Newspapers reported surrender ceremonies and rebuilding efforts. Victory parades filled streets. But behind secured doors, the foundations of a different post-war order were being laid. One document at a time. One decision at a time. Always classified. Always justified. Always unseen. As the weeks passed, the scope of the operation expanded. What began as selective administrative discretion turned into a coordinated effort. Intelligence branches on both sides of the Atlantic exchanged encrypted messages. Names were cross-checked. Backgrounds reassessed. Files were stamped again, each mark adding distance between truth and record. field officers received revised instructions. Certain detainees were to be held separately. Others were to be released into controlled custody. Transportation orders were rerouted. Instead of prisons or tribunals, some individuals were moved to secure facilities under Allied supervision. These movements were not logged in standard military channels. Tension grew within the ranks. Not all officers agreed with the direction of events. Some questioned the legality. Others the ethics. But dissent rarely traveled far. The chain of command absorbed resistance. Objections were noted, then buried under operational necessity. The war was over, they were told. A new threat was emerging. The pressure came from uncertainty. Intelligence reports warned of ideological shifts, of influence spreading across borders, of future instability in Europe. Knowledge became leverage. Technical expertise became currency. In this environment, secrecy was no longer a tool. It was a policy. Meetings were held late at night. Curtains drawn. Maps rolled out on bare tables. British and American officers spoke in measured tones. Decisions were framed as temporary. Emergency measures. Short-term compromises. But the paperwork told a different story. Long-term arrangements. Extended protections. Non-disclosure directives. The operation required coordination across occupied zones. This increased the risk of exposure. To prevent leaks, information was fragmented. No single participant had the full picture. Each officer knew only their assignment. Each clerk handled only part of the record. The structure itself became a shield. By mid-1945, the classified choice had become irreversible. Too many resources were invested. Too many files altered. To reverse course would mean acknowledgement. And acknowledgement was unacceptable. Publicly, the Allies spoke of justice and reconstruction. Privately, they planned containment and advantage. The consequences were immediate, though invisible. Individuals disappeared from official lists. Investigations stalled without explanation. Requests for information were denied or delayed. Historians would later find gaps. Missing files. Unexplained transfers. At the time, no one asked questions aloud. This phase was defined by escalation without announcement. By decisions made quietly, then defended fiercely. The machinery of secrecy moved forward, powered not by ideology, but by calculation. Europe was being rebuilt on the surface. Beneath it, history was being edited. The decisive moment arrived without ceremony. No single order marked it. No announcement followed. It came through confirmation cables. Through final approvals. Through silence. By late 1945, the fate of those involved was sealed. Protected individuals were relocated. Some received new identities. Others were absorbed into advisory roles. Their pasts remained classified. Their presence undocumented. The system held. The greatest loss was not material. It was historical clarity. Records that could have explained actions, motivations, and responsibility were locked away. Some were destroyed. Others were scattered across archives under restricted access. The trail ended by design. Within Allied leadership, the choice was justified as necessary. The war had ended, but uncertainty ruled. Stability demanded control. Control demanded secrecy. The cost was memory. This decision altered how post-war Europe developed. Not openly. Not visibly. But structurally. Policies were shaped by information the public never had. Threats were defined by intelligence never released. Trust eroded quietly, replaced by suspicion and division. The classified choice changed who spoke and who disappeared, who was judged and who was spared. It shifted accountability away from courts and into confidential rooms. History moved forward with missing pieces. Those who implemented the decision returned home. Files followed them. Locked. Forgotten. Official narratives simplified the ending of the war. Victory. Liberation. Reconstruction. The omissions remained unnoticed. The climax was not an explosion. It was an erasure. The decision did not end with signatures. It ended with disappearance. When the war officially closed, Europe moved forward in public view. Borders were redrawn. Governments were restored. Trials were announced. Reconstruction began. But beneath that visible progress, something else faded. Quietly. Systematically. The documents were sealed and removed from circulation. Some were archived under restricted access. Others were divided, misplaced, or absorbed into unrelated files. Names that once appeared in reports stopped appearing at all. Not crossed out. Not corrected. Simply absent. The people connected to the decision followed the same path. Officers were reassigned to new commands. Clerks returned to civilian life. Intelligence personnel carried fragments of the story but never the whole. No single witness remained who could describe the full sequence. Memory fractured. Buildings that hosted the meetings were reused. Walls repainted. Furniture replaced. The rooms lost their purpose. Only silence remained, where voices once argued in low tones. The decision stayed behind, locked into the structure of records that were never meant to be opened. Years passed. Then decades. Historians searching the period encountered gaps. Incomplete chains of custody. References to reports that could not be located. Transfers without destinations. Questions that led nowhere. The absence became normal. Accepted. Footnotes replaced explanations. Public history simplified the end of the war. Victory was clean. Responsibility was assigned. Closure was declared. The classified choice did not fit that narrative. So it remained outside it. Untouched. Unspoken. What was lost was not only information. It was continuity. The ability to trace cause and consequence. The understanding of how power moved when the fighting stopped. How decisions made in silence shaped the years that followed. By the time the archives began to open, much had already vanished. Paper decays. Witnesses die. Context erodes. What remains is partial. Fragmented. Inconclusive. The choice made in 1945 was never overturned. It was never fully revealed. It dissolved into time. Into locked files. Into forgotten rooms. And history moved on, carrying the weight of something it could no longer name. If this story mattered to you, consider subscribing. More forgotten history is coming.